So hi again. It's good to see you again. And my name is Jay Burney, and I am the president of Birds of Niagara. And this is a great event, and glad you're here. I am also the advocacy director for the Western New York Environmental Alliance, who's doing this next program, and I'm actually going to introduce it with a short presentation. I want to mention again that we're happy to be doing this as part of the Birchfield Collaborates series, and Birchfield is holding a membership special. You can get 10% off membership. There's a registration table outside, so if you want to join Birchfield, this is a good time to do it because you get a special discount. So this program is going to include kind of a community meeting. So I'll give my presentation talking a little bit about what 30 by 30 is, and then we'll bring up some people to talk about it. If you don't know what the Western New York Environmental Alliance is, we've been around for, 10, 15 years, and the idea is to bring various environmental groups in Western New York to the table to talk about, to advocate for, and to really try to understand how we work through promoting the environment. And there's a lot of different ways to describe the environment. We do a lot of different projects. We've worked on the outer harbor of Buffalo. You might have heard about the development that's been proposed down there for quite a long time by the Erie Canal Harbor Development Corporation. And I kind of went through that with no public input. So we created a program to bring the public to the table to talk about what to do out there. As a result, it hasn't been perfect, but you don't have a lot of condos out there. You're welcome. We do have some park area. And it's not exactly what we want. We want more nature, but we don't have condos yet. So that's the kind of project that we do. And we've been pretty busy with something like that. About 2 years ago, we declared that our future has to be focused on biodiversity. How do we promote biodiversity? What is biodiversity? What does that mean? What does it mean to us? And so we started something called the Decade of Biodiversity. So we're focusing programs and projects around that. 30 by 30 is a project that is a kind of internationally designed, originally from the United Nations policy-wise. The idea is that you protect a certain percentage of land and water by 2030 or 2050. So 30 by 30 was adopted by the United States 2 years ago, adopted by New York State a year and a half ago. And so we're trying to figure out what that means. What does 30 by 30 mean to Western New York, Buffalo? 30 by 30, protecting forever land, water, etc. by the year 2030 is complicated. What in heck can we do in Buffalo? What in heck can we do in urban areas? And so we have decided to convene a series of meetings to talk about how we can participate in that, and how we can encourage that, how we can advocate for that. It's easy if you think about New York State, the Adirondacks, big chunk of it. And so New York State has an advancement in that. We have organizations working in Western New York with this, notably the Western New York Land Conservancy. They're doing things like the Western New York Wildways, where they're trying to protect vast tracts of land. The Western New York Land Conservancy protects a lot of land, still more rural than urban. So Buffalo, what's the process? What do we do? How can we do anything? And so what we're trying to do is figure out what that means and how to do it. So again, a community conversation. So what's our motivation? Doug Tallamy, who many of you may have heard of, has said these incredible things that talk about how we have lost so much. And I'm not going to read it to you. I'll let you read it. But 95% of the United States has been logged, tilled, drained, grazed, paved, or otherwise developed. Yeah. In Buffalo, probably more than that. So that's the motivation right there. Catherine Landis had a slide just like this. I'm a birder, and my motivation happens to involve biodiversity and wildlife, and I'm with the Pollinator Conservation Association, so the loss of things like monarch butterflies, precipitous decline. This bird decline is incredible, and it's one of the motivations also for Birds in the Niagara. We're losing a lot of birds, a lot of wildlife. That's very motivational. How do we turn that around? How do we turn that around so that our children our grandchildren have birds. I mean, I grew up with Rachel Carson, Silent Spring. It's getting real. So that's motivation. So part of our campaign initiatives involve promoting and supporting leadership. Us, you, elected officials. And part of that comes from community engagement. How do we get people to be aware of what we need to do, what we want to do, what we can do? We also think it's very important to promote collaboration. There are a lot of organizations and agencies around us, and by agencies I mean state agencies, city agencies, county agencies. We're trying to say, what can we do? Erie County has forests, for instance, and parks. City of Buffalo does. Various communities have those kinds of things. Are they important in terms of 30 by 30? Well, yeah. Does that mean that everything that we have is going to be permanent? I don't know. Does that mean that everything that we have, like even county parks, are they perfect habitat? No, a lot of them are tree plantations. They're not native, but it's a start. Some people say that any tree is better than no tree, and in a lot of respects it is, but we still want to have native trees, native plants. It's part of the conversation. And then what's the strategy? How do we move towards engaging and figuring out what the policies are and coordination? So the Western New York Environmental Alliance has taken a position that we want to help coordinate these discussions with those groups. It also involves social justice. There's a lot of communities that are excluded from conservation conversations, excluded from environmental justice conversations. We need to work together. We need to collaborate. We need to find ways to bring our community forward collectively. So one of the things we have to do is decide how to characterize ecologically productive. And again, that goes to native trees versus non-native trees, green space versus non-native green space. I even like to bring in ideas like, how about the atmosphere? How can we create a more ecologically productive atmosphere? And although that's not necessarily conserving lands and waters forever, it's such a big, important part of what our environment is that we have to figure out how to include the atmosphere. One of the things that is important for us to know is that we are connected here. It's not just us, it's not just our backyard, although our backyard is incredibly important, but we're connected in Buffalo to the Great Lakes. Great Lakes, 20% of the world's fresh surface water. That's a big deal. That surface water attracts a lot of biodiversity. It attracts a lot of migrating animals. One of the things about birds in the Niagara is that we talk about the birds that come here in the winter. We're celebrating winter birds out of the Niagara River. A lot of these birds are Arctic birds. We have waterfowl that's come from the far north. Sometimes we have snowy owls, not so much this winter. But these birds that come from the Arctic, they come and they depend on our habitats in the wintertime. We also have birds in the summertime that migrate, neotropical warblers, for instance, that migrate from Central America, South America, the Caribbean, the Amazon. So our connectivity is a part of how we have to think about what makes us ecologically productive. We want to protect, we think about, how do we protect nature? How do we protect the planet? Let's protect the Amazon. Let's protect the Arctic. Guess what? Let's protect our area, the Niagara River, globally important bird area, the Ramsar sites. These are incredible designations that help bring us to a place where we can understand what we have to protect and why we have to protect it. Even in Buffalo, we protect our shorelines, we protect our rivers, we protect our ponds, we protect our backyards. That connectivity is a big part of 30 by 30. This was what we had on the outer harbor before they started construction out there. It was a beautiful grassland. We had been doing monarch butterfly counts for 10 years out there. The last one we did was 2 years ago. The day after we finished, It got bulldozed. Monarch butterflies, how do we protect monarch butterflies? I'm sorry I'm emotional, but it is what it is. So we did a campaign also, I talked about the Outer Harbor, Save the Bell Slip Preserve. That was something that the Western Earth Environmental Alliance worked really hard on. We did not save it. We're not done. And this is other places. This is a Western New York Land Conservancy spot called Stella Niagara. Thank you. There's a lot of Western New York Land Conservancy people here today that have helped us save that. And so this is what our shoreline looks like from out over the lake. And birds and light don't work well together. During migration season, birds collide with light, towers, buildings. Over 1 million birds die in our region every year because of collisions with buildings. Can we do something like turn the lights out in order to help conserve nature, in order to help go towards a 30 by 30 concept? I think it's an important policy. It's one of the policies that we can say, yeah, this is helping us conserve nature. And there's a lot of things like that. So what we're trying to do is identify places, identify what the existing protections are, what future protections there might be, private, public parks, parkways, and designated conservation areas and nature preserves. A lot of places that we have to think about, how can we make that work with a 30 by 30 perspective? It's not just forever protecting land and water. That's a big part of it. But let's think about how we can, for the next year, turn the damn lights out during migration season. That's a big step. I think it's part of the conversation that we need to have. The state has recently decided that wetlands and waters and lakes and streams are a part of what they're going to be putting together for 30 by 30. I think we help motivate them, because we had a meeting at the Museum of Science several months ago, and we brought this up, and the DC commissioner was there, the regional one, and since then that policy has been announced. So I think that we're having some impact. And what do we do with agriculture and farmland? I mean, is that a part of forever protected? Well, it's not the same as having a native grassland, but it's something that we should think about. How do we do agriculture? How do we do farmland? Dairy farms, pesticides. Let's think about some policies there. How can we make it a better impact on nature? I like organic farming. I'm sure you do too. So we want to promote policy adoption. We want to work with local governments, regional governments, model policies. We have some, and this is from the town of, I can't read what it is, but it's a local town. It's a resolution that was adopted by a local town. It's not perfect, but it's a model for us to go to the government, go to the mayors, go to the council members, go to the community and say, here's something we can think about adopting as a policy. A policy is a good step. It's not necessarily a law, but it's a good step. It starts the conversation. It starts some engagement. Let's promote ordinances about native plants. So many of our communities, it's against the law to have a native plant garden for a variety of reasons. It doesn't look well. There's arguments about it attracts the wrong kind of wildlife. We can do native plant ordinances that are attractive, that are functional, and that are very productive. Let's adopt some native plant ordinances as policies, and maybe even as laws. Native trees. There's a project, a concept called biophilic cities. At Birds in the Niagara 2 years ago, we had a presentation by a fellow that designed the idea of biophilic cities. And that idea is a nature-friendly city. Why isn't Buffalo a nature-friendly city? We're in such an important place in the world, such an important place in the region. We have birds, we have fish, we have insects. And nature makes us live. No nature does the opposite. So biophilic, nature-friendly city is something that we have to work hard on in our communities. We can do it. There's a lot of models. Appropriate lighting, appropriate noise, lights out, Noise is pollution. Noise, I work at the Times Beach Nature Preserve downtown, and we have a lot of things like amphibians there, birds. They communicate, they become productive breeders, a lot of it because of their vocalizations. Noise pollution harms that tremendously. So why don't we think about that? On the Outer Harbor right now, there's a new concert venue. There's times when you go down there, a lot of times in the summer, you can't hear yourself think. Think if you're a bird trying to attract a mate, or trying to talk to the young birds, or if you're an amphibian, you want to mate, you want to communicate. That noise is deathly. Another thing is dark sky. It's a little bit difficult in a city to think about a dark sky ordinance, but it's not an impossible thing to think about. Turn out the lights during certain seasons is one way to start to think about that. We've been working with, believe it or not, Niagara Falls lighting. That's an important sensitive place for a lot of birds. The lights are on almost 24 hours a day, including during breeding season. We've been talking with them about, can we do some experiments? Can we turn the lights off during certain times, during migrating season, for instance? And can we do some science to see if that's impacting how the birds react if there's no lights there? And that's a policy, that's science, that if we do it right, it'll attract international attention. Niagara Falls turned out the lights and discovered that blah, blah, blah. Birds are more productive when the lights are out. They do that in New York City. It's one of the things around the 9/11, the trade tower. They've done this kind of science there. We can do it here. It'll bring international attention. It'll engage our community and engage all of us in trying to figure out how can we make that a better thing. These are just some areas that we've taken, some local parks, and by we, I mean I work with the Pollinator Conservation Association. The one on the bottom right is Aqua Lane Park in the town of Tonawanda. It was a grassland. Now it's a pretty nice pollinator garden. We're building shoreline that will interact with the entire river. There's an archipelago of islands just off the shoreline of Aqua Lane Park that has tern nests, common terns, which are becoming increasingly rare, working with the DEC. Anyway, this little green area is a great model to think about how we can take the Niagara River and some of our shorelines and make them more nature-friendly. I'm just going to skip through some of these things here. We want to have this. I know this is some nice things to look at. We have to protect them. We have to improve them and increase them, I think. This is what our area looks like at night. I just think lights out is an important policy that we have to think about, because although there's safety issues, I mean, people don't want to be unsafe at night, I understand that, we can still create lighting ordinances and lighting times that are more nature-friendly. I love to hear this bird. This is a little yellow warbler. They're all around. They're declining, but we need to protect these beautiful little yellow warblers. And so, decade of biodiversity, leadership. We're thinking that we need to create a leadership council to have more convened meetings. We had our first one in November. This is our second one. We have another one Sunday in Niagara Falls. We need your help, and we need your advice. We need your input. And so this next part of this meeting is going to be about how to move forward with your ideas. There's a survey you can take if you put your phone on that. We have some handouts for that to help with your ideas and advice. All right, I think that's it. I hope that's it, because I want to move on to this thing here. I think we have a sign-up sheet. And thank you. And I'm going to introduce John Whitney. Thank you. John is the president of the West New York Environmental Alliance, and we're going to have a panel up here. If you would ask questions or make statements, please use the microphones. If you don't use the microphone, your voice won't be recorded on our video. We are recording as a video. So if you have a question, let's get to the mics. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Jay. We're going to take just a second to bring the panel up to the table. So if you want to use this a moment to stretch your legs, but don't leave the room, we'll switch our presentations and then we'll reconvene for some dialogue. Okay. So we'll let the panelists introduce themselves. As Jay said, my name's John Whitney. I'm the chair of the Western New York Environmental Alliance, and I've taken that role over the last few years, picking up from Linda Schneekloth, who's sitting here in the front, and well, it's the front now because the first 3 rows have been emptied out, but Linda's going to be taking some notes as well. And what we're hoping to do with this next 30 minutes or so is have some dialogue that's primarily led by you and maybe prompted some by the folks up at the tables here. So again, my name's John Whitney, and we'll let the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll continue our dialogue. So Terry, go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Terry Robinson from the City of Buffalo with the Western New York Environmental Alliance, the Pollinator Conservation Association, and General Roustabout in the City of Buffalo. And here, as Jay so expertly introduced, just as part of the environment, the interconnected overall look at things, but I'm going to bring at least primarily today, I think, the urban environment aspect of it. And my particular entry into the thing is often on the historic preservation and that element of environment. So I'm going to speak out on that really quickly first, because it's just as integral and just as indicative of the spectrum of the environment. When they speak of Stella Niagara preservation that people work so hard and diligently to secure as a part of the legacy of what these folks have done over the last 10, 20 years. So I used to skate down the hill of Stella Niagara on a toboggan when I was at Stella Niagara Academy back in like 1965. So it becomes personal, it becomes real, and it is pervasive. So that's me, and I can't even touch this lady next to me.
You can. I'm Margaret Wooster. I know a lot of you. The lights are really bright here, so it's kind of hard to see, but I know some of you anyway. I'm with the Western New York Environmental Alliance. Oh, sorry. I'm with Western New York Environmental Alliance on the board with Jay and Linda and Terry and Anna and a few other people. And I've been involved with this stamp thing. Probably I've been sort of obsessed with it for the last year or so. So I've just finished a letter to, with the help of all these people, to send to our elected leaders, starting with the federal, Deb Haaland from the Department of Interior. So we're concerned about the, the native land, the Tonawanda Seneca Nation, and the impacts on them. So I know that's not exactly 30 by 30, but I do want to say to the lady over there that, we are sort of reaching out, but we're reaching out, kind of not so much locally as trying to reach the people who might be able to make a difference for people like the Tonawanda Seneca Nation. Yeah, so that's all I'll say for now.
Hi, and I'm Anna Prepera. I'm with the Western New York Environmental Alliance as well as Birds on the Niagara. And I'm also on the Stewardship Council for the Grassroots Gardens Network. And I'm here to speak a little bit more about the different ways that we can protect lands for example, with urban gardens and making sure that we're connecting our those corridors for pollinators as well as larger wildlife.
While he's helping us, I would like to just also say that Anna and I think Anna and I have been involved in the startup of Great Lakes United, which used to be a binational Great Lakes group, now coming back as Great Lakes Ecoregion Network. And so we're involved in meetings with the Canadians and all around the Great Lakes. From Duluth, Minnesota to Montreal, Quebec, and trying to get a good bioregional feel for this area that we live in. And I learned at a conference that we were just at in Toronto that that Canada also has passed a 30 by 30 initiative. So people are beginning to think about this from the little scale, but all the way up to the bioregional scale, which in our case could be at its biggest, the Great Lakes Basin, which is, as somebody said, the largest freshwater body, the largest body of freshwater on Earth, but the drainage to it, the land around it, is relatively small. And so you can get all of us, people who are trying to work on saving or restoring or protecting the Great Lakes, you can fit us all in a room, or at least maybe 6 rooms, 1 for each lake and 1 for the St. Lawrence River. But so that's another hat. I know we're thinking also very small, but we also have to think Great Lakes wide because it's so important to the planet.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention too that we actually did have a forester from Southern Ontario come and speak to the board of the Western New York Environmental Alliance to share some of the strategies that they're using in Southern Ontario, because Ontario itself is also a 30 by 30 plan, and some of their strategies as well, which was really helpful, thinking about incorporating both private lands as well as state and national lands that are protected too. So having those cross-pollinating opportunities to interact with our Canadian neighbors is really helpful with the Great Lakes Ecoregion Network.
So as Jay mentioned, if you point your phone at that QR code, you can grab a survey that can collect your ideas later in case you're not quite prepared to share them now. So that'll come around again, plus there are some copies of that QR code out on the registration table, along with some other information about 30 by 30 and biodiversity, which we encourage you to pick up. That may also prompt some ideas. Another prompt is this series of slides that I'll bring up. So right now, what kind of landscapes, lands, or water should be considered for 30 by 30? What do you think? I mean, Jay provided some examples, and those are great examples, but we really would like to have some dialogue from the room. So if you have something to say at this point, grab a mic and talk with us. And if not, then we'll get some prompts from Kelly or Brenda or from the table. Terry, you mentioned in particular urban land interests, and so one of the challenges we believe is how do we make 30 by 30 meaningful for urban and suburban areas in Western New York in particular and beyond that. Any thoughts on that?
Any Boyders out there?
Nick has one, but use the mic, Nick.
Hey, Nick.
Even with your voice.
Well, now I forgot what I was going to ask.
How's that possible?
And go ahead and introduce yourself fully. I just said Nick. So.
Absolutely. I'm Dr. Nick Henshu. I'm the Director of Undergraduate Studies for the Department of Environment and Sustainability at the University at Buffalo. And my research as an urban and restoration ecologist centers a lot around what Buffalo looks like coming out of the other end of 200 years of industrialization. And, you know, this is, I often tell the story that it's a short story, John, sorry. That, you know, when my wife and I moved here 6 years ago, what we found was not the Buffalo we were warned about. What we found was a city that's, you know, completely flourishing and coming back to life. And we just have 200 years of penance to pay for industrial sins that have been committed before us. And so one of the things I think about a lot with the 30 by 30 is brownfields, post-industrial areas, marginalized pieces of land. We're used to thinking about large tracts, all the Iroquois area, all of the, how much land contiguously is going to be enveloped by a stamp, all of these kinds of things. But really, I think the meat and potatoes of what we have that's special here is this ability to take traffic circles and marginalized highway medians and vacant lots. And what are we going to do with Bethlehem Steel and Tonawanda Coke and Ford and GM and US Steel? And all of those kinds of areas are habitats too. You know, Albert Einstein said that the environment is everything that isn't me. And I think about that a lot because if we just go into protection and conservation, thinking solely about large tracts of Allegheny forest and Letchworth State Forest, I think we're missing a big part of what we could be conserving for everyone's health, everyone's benefit, everyone's ecosystem services, and everyone's day-to-day living their best life.
Thank you, Nick. Any other comments from the room? There's one. Great, thank you. And go ahead and share your name, too.
Please.
What do we do with flatlands like in Albion and that whole area, like the plateau that is like around Medina, Lockport? And what do we do when it comes to solar panels? You know, sometimes I'm kind of thinking as I'm looking at these things popping up, I think, man, maybe there's a way that we can have some kind of plants or something that can still benefit birds while still having those things. Maybe there could be some kind of a compromise. I don't know.
One of the things that some of the solar farms are being encouraged to do is to not mow every square inch of that solar landscape, but to leave pollinator habitat, to leave edges, to leave corridors, to integrate it with some grazing opportunities and a wide variety of uses. It doesn't have to all just be mowed. So that's one of the considerations. And does that help us get to 30 by 30? In some cases, it may well, if there's some edges and other areas that are part of the habitat and not just panel surface. But those panel surfaces also don't have to be on farmland from my perspective. They can be in other appropriate areas. So maybe we should be also thinking about that so we don't sacrifice areas that could be 30 by 30 protected areas just to accommodate energy production. That's a bias of mine.
Excuse me, would you give us your name?
My name, I'm from West Seneca, Joseph Sullivan.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I'd also like to add, I'm also on the board of the United Solar Energy Supporters. It's a New York-based nonprofit that supports public education on large-scale renewable energy as well as community-scale renewable energy. There are things like pollinator mixed seeds that developers can use, that they can incorporate wildlife fencing so that it does not inhibit wildlife moving through the solar field, but it does keep people out. There's opportunities to have habitats for birds and pollinators, especially if those protections are built into the plans. It's typically very important for community members to be involved and municipalities to incorporate these plans into the development codes that they're working with developers for. There's a lot of resources on our website at usesusa.org if anybody's ever interested in learning more about those. We also have toolkits and model plans that you can use there as well.
Thank you, Anna.
Uses, so usesusa.org.
Okay, thank you.
usesusa.org.
we'll check that out. Thank you. Any other, Linda?
Terry, you had a comment
And go
too?
ahead and introduce yourself at the same time.
Okay. Hi, I'm Linda Schneekloff. I'm with the Western New York Environmental Alliance as well. I have two thoughts. One is a continuation of your question. We often get accused that the solar panels are like an industrial landscape and that they don't fit into certain areas. Well, I think that's a really interesting point, because unlike the stamp industrialization process, is when you use solar panels, you don't actually have to disturb the land. And when the solar panels use their lifetime and go away, you still have the land and you still have the earth and the habitat and everything that was there beforehand. So it's really a very light touch, and I think that being more careful about what the language is that we use it would be very, very helpful. But what I wanted to ask about, and one of the things I think is really important, is we live in New York State. And New York State is a home rule state, which means that land use decisions rest with the municipality. I see that both as a difficulty and also as an opportunity. Which is to say, difficulty because we might say that these lands should be protected, but we don't have that decision making because it actually rests with the municipality in which you live. But that is also the opportunity, because if decisions can be made on a more local, regional scale, then we actually have more input into what areas might be considered beyond what we talked about as the forever protected landscapes, which we hope will just be included, because I think we're something like 20% in New York State now. We are, as I remember the figures.
22%. We're not that far from 30, although that last 8% is a lot harder to get to.
Right,
We know
right.
that.
8%. I don't think that the existing protected lands will necessarily fill in that 8%. And that's, of course, an interim goal. The 30 by 30 is an interim goal to the 50 by 50, which is going to 50%. That's a lot. So anyway, I think it's really important for us to think about what the whole home rule state issues will be as we start to think about this, and how can we take advantage of that and not just see it as an impediment to being able to protect lands.
Gotcha.
And of course, we know the long list of tools that are available, from acquisition to conservation easements. But does that help us achieve some of the goals on especially smaller areas or urban areas or suburban areas, or other than those larger natural areas that certainly are important, and we don't want to give up on those at all? That's a big focus. But how do we get to some of the others? Brenda, were you preparing to say something?
No, I
You were
was-
just preparing to hand the mic to someone else.
Although I will take the opportunity to say, I'm Brenda Young. I'm a professor at Damon University in our sustainability program, and also on the Alliance. Nick, when you were mentioning brownfields, essentially, and then we talk about taking green fields for farmland for solar panels, I shake my head. We've already got asphalt in many of those environments. It's a major restoration effort to bring biodiversity back to those habitats. Why are we not capitalizing on that? I hate to use the word capitalizing, but why do we not put renewable energy there and leave our intact lands alone?
Yeah, that's a reflection of the same bias I was sharing earlier too, but I don't know, we have to get there from my perspective. It's Nick, grab a mic with your thought.
Okay, and Terry, sorry if you were gonna.
No, I'm listening.
I love you, Terry. So, how one of, and maybe this is the recovering public school teacher in me, but to me, so many of these problems could be solved with great educational programs and the outreach that about solar alone. Right, and one of the things that we're running into a lot of trouble with is, for instance, we have students going to intern with the New York Department of Transportation, Army Corps of Engineers, and so on and so forth, and they come back and say, you know, we couldn't use native plants because the foremen and the contractors all say, well, they don't grow. And if you're used to just putting, if you're used to putting sodgrass and arborvitaes in as a landscaping technique, no, you can't plant milkweed that same way. And I feel like so much of that education about seed stratification, how to get native plants going, how to build for pollinators, is all so much education. And if we don't start teaching this, we're, as Brenda just said, we're screaming into the abyss over and over and over again about using marginalized lands for renewables, about, you know, getting people on board with using pollinator-friendly plants and thinking about what natives should be in particular ecosystems. So one of the things that I think we're far enough to say something is UB is designing a program right now that would actually partner with Erie County Department of Corrections for native planting and green infrastructure, and kind of inmate education programs, and also training students. Our sociology department and the Department of Environment and Sustainability are training our students to be sustainable incarceration administrators. And so I think there's a lot of really cool tie-ins that you know, we can all play in the sandbox together, but the ticket is you know, starting with this basic education.
I've been subtly trying to prompt you for some thoughts about what you might want to share with us. So while Nick was talking about those educational opportunities, which I see as one of the huge benefits of the whole 30 by 30 initiative, both so beyond the environmental, ecological, biodiversity benefits, the opportunity for engagement and education associated with land and water and air, as Jay mentioned, those are great opportunities. But I'm also saying, well, what are the obstacles? Home rule was mentioned as one of the obstacles, maybe one of the opportunities as well. What are your thoughts about obstacles? Because it seems like that's part of what we have to get past is obstacles.
Well, I'll mention that we at least have made a little bit of progress in tolerating non-grass lawns. We have a long way to go. But people see a green lawn, like a golf course, and they think, oh, it's biodiverse and it's nature. But of course, it doesn't really offer many resources to native wildlife. So working within the legal systems in our municipalities to educate them that it may look sloppy to some people, but it's actually quite beautiful. It doesn't require as many chemicals and doesn't require as much mowing, raking leaves, all those things that take up so much time, that we could just be a different mindset.
Fundamental lawn care questions. There's a question over here.
Sure. Hi, my name is Gina. I don't belong to any of these organizations, and I know you have obstacle up there, but are there incentives to encourage biodiversity, for example? I mean, I live in the city in North Buffalo, and I've seen 2 non-grass lawns. I love the idea. I love the idea.
Does anybody want to talk about incentives for a minute? Certainly there are some. Was that Kelly, were you volunteering to talk about it?
No, I was just taking
Just
the
taking the mic back.
Hi, my name's Craig Carlson, and I was at the November meeting, and what struck me was the amount of ideas that were generated in that 20 minutes that we had at the end. I had said to Jay earlier, I'm waiting to kind of see even that list.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. That was a similar environment with a little bit more dialogue taking place. We have that list. We were going to feed this into that and then get that back out to everybody. So
Where's that, Jay?
That's one of our next steps.
What are we talking about?
In our session that was at the Science Museum, when we had some dialogue with the audience as well. So yes, we'll be sharing that back out as we...
I know, I just wanted to,
But
before
yes,
I
thank you for bringing it up, though.
fell off my plate. Incentives are tough. How do you force policy on existing mindsets or existing municipalities or policies, et cetera, et cetera? But there needs to be ways where you force that more. You know, last summer I was driving and walking around a lot, and I thought, this is so green. This is so lush and verdant. There's no problem. I would believe a lot of people would look into a landscape, into a parkscape, into the lakescape, and say, there's no problem here.
I think you're exactly right.
And that's kind of a big global.
That's an obstacle.
It's
is what
huge,
you're-
right? I'm like, God, this is great. I don't have to do anything. It's, you know, it's taking care of itself.
And Marissa, how much time do you spend in the head of an organization just trying to find the resources? Yeah.
Well, right. Capital is a big thing. But back to like 30-30, why not? And I said this in November. Why not 30 inches by 30 inches? And engaging that educational level of children, high schoolers, and the 30-30 could be just a raised plot with native plants. Just, you know, again, that simple, one of those simple levels. 30 by 3 could be, what do they call them here? The green spaces in front of their yards.
Oh, yeah, the hell patch.
Right?
Whatever they call it.
And what I had said then, and I'll repeat it again, is like if you start creating it like a light bright, where, you know, where students and children get to plug into these maps. I love maps. I love seeing maps, and I love seeing myself on the map, which I don't see very much. But that whole idea of like you start connecting these dots at that, and at high school level is a great level because the high school teachers and students can teach downwards. The medians, I mean, they're all there. The most, and I'm talking urban. I live out in the country, so again, like I can walk around and just see green space, wooded space, wetlands, brown spaces, and you know, and negative spaces like parking lots.
So
empty.
I think we'll continue to use those ideas and the ones you fed into the November session and the survey as well, and start getting that back out to people. Marissa, you were going to say a few things, including introducing yourself.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hi.
Thank you.
I'm Marisa Ricci. I'm the executive director at Western New York Land Conservancy. It's great to be here. Two things. So one, when you were talking about obstacles, the first thing that came to mind was just funding for projects. And even though we have great opportunities for funding in New York State for land protection, it often takes years to get that funding in the door. So funding is a consistent problem. We would protect so much more land if we had access to so much more money. So that's one big obstacle. But I also wanted to just mention an opportunity, which is just getting involved in your local village or town, joining the environmental committee or going to meetings. I was stunned. I live in the village of Williamsville, and I was surprised when I read through our codes that we have a code that says you need to plant native species. And then I was on the committee that got to approve whether a plan could go through, and I would go through their list and see if they had natives, and I found so many not native species on there. So just if you're looking to get involved and just make a difference in your local community, that's a really good way to advocate on a smaller scale and get involved.
And I've brought this up in a number of settings too. While it may not be permanent protection, it seems like almost all of us who have some responsibility for some yard don't have to think about every bit of our yard being mowed. 30% is not that hard, and might be even 50%, 75% of our yards don't have to be grass. And that would be huge in terms of its environmental impact. And there's a lot written about that. We've had some people talk about that as well. Brenda, were you?
I was going to make one follow-up to Marissa's point, and that is a lot of people don't know where to get native plants, and a lot of nurseries don't carry many native plants. So when you go there as a consumer and you don't see any, let them know that you want them and get that message out as a consumer and they will try to supply. I did see one thing up here with the eco-gentrification or alienation. There, of course, are a lot of suburban parks and efforts throughout the region, but I will give a plug for Open Buffalo because they are trying to develop an eco-center on the east side, and their goal would be to do education of the community, have some green space in that situation. Of course, funding is an obstacle for that kind of project, but just making you aware that there are these groups that are working in somewhat isolated pockets that are trying to make those strides.
We've got time for one or two more, but we have no more time, actually. So here's your opportunity. Scan this QR code. Scan this QR code and give us some feedback that way. And we appreciate the input that you've had and that you'll continue to have as this dialogue continues. So as Jay points out, we need to prepare for our next speaker, and you all need to stretch your legs a little bit. Panel, thank you for being up here to smile at everybody and share a few thoughts, and we'll be ready for the next session shortly. Thank you, everybody.